Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Essence of Alexandria. I am your host, John, and I am joined today not by Megan. She had some family obligations with the Thanksgiving season, but our friend Vince from episode 3, Professor Vincent McCoy.
Hello.
Yeah, today we're talking about a heavier topic, although I imagine there will be some levity because of because of the nature of Vince and I's friendship.
And to be fair, because I am what's called a decent educator, and I know how to infect the most dire of subjects with a note of comedy.
You kind of have to, especially when it's
Yeah.
heavy. Now, when I say heavy, fortunately, it's not sad heavy. It's just like complicated heavy. We're talking about.
It can be.
I was going to say Christian sexual ethics more broadly because I know there's more forms, but I think for today, since Megan's not with us and I don't know where she stands, we're just going to cover the basics of what's called natural law sexual ethics. So I'm going to let the professor kind of take the floor here because this is his domain. I have a pretty like strong grasp of the basics and the ethics applied, but not necessarily the philosophy.
All right. As you brought up, um, I'm I am most interested in, and I think it is correct, a broadly natural law perspective. So broadly speaking, this is the Aristotelian Thomistic tradition of ethics. Um, and just to sort of set the stage, I tend not to, I tend not to have a lot of tolerance for the whole. Well, here is one system of ethics that we should study as a system of ethics, and here's some other system of ethics that we should study as two separate ideas, and these are one approach and another approach, and we have to decide which one we like best, and that sort of thing. I will have very little of that. Rather, I think what we should do is we should try and examine. We should try and examine what we can figure out about the world metaphysically, spiritually, naturally, all of the above, and then build up ethics from there. And that is really the natural law approach. The natural law approach is from what we can already know about stuff, about the world, and in this case, about ourselves and our own bodies and our own relationships. Um, and then building from the sort of factual stuff that we can already know about the world, and then uh, deriving normative conclusions from that. And that's the natural law approach, rather than starting with sort of like uh,
For our audience
normative
who might
first
not know what
principles.
normative means,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Good point. Good point. I
you're not in
audience
the
forgive me.
classroom.
I no, no, no. It doesn't matter if I'm in a classroom or not. This happens in a classroom too. I forget that words I use, which are very narrow and specific in meaning, are not wildly and commonly used. Normative being one of them. Normative just means ought kind of statements.
It
So that can be
should be.
ethical. Yeah, what should be or what should be done, especially it's practical, practical deliberation. So that can be normative statements are usually ethical, right? So ethical judgments are normative statements. You should do this. You shouldn't do that. But it also that can include anything like even as something as simple as like instructions for assembling your IKEA furniture. Those are normative claims that you should insert peg A into slot B in this particular order. And well, speaking of, let's get into natural law approaches to sexual ethics.
I was about to make a joke about inserting
Too late, I already
the
beat you to
wrong
it.
peg into the wrong hole.
That does unfortunately happen, and
IKEA furniture examples. Uh, yeah. So, did I lose you?
no, you're good. You're good.
Okay.
So go ahead. Where do we want to begin?
Uh just like I guess the basic approach. Something you said. I was originally going to make a post on a page I was an admin of. I never ended up making it, but you wrote out this really nice thing, just kind of uh, outlining the base, a really brief but solid defense of like natural law. Things have a natural purpose that we can understand intuitively, right? When you see a hammer, you know it's for hitting things.
Hmm.
Go ahead.
Right. So that is that's applicable. So we could take analogies to artifacts. In other words, things that we make. Right. We make things all the time that have particular purposes. As you say, a hammer is for hammering. It's for hammering a nail. And part of how you know that is because people make them for that purpose. But beyond that, you can tell the difference between something made well and something made poorly based upon whether it is suited to the end that is intrinsic to it, or technically speaking, extrinsic to it, but that's a distinction that will matter later, so hold off. Forget about it for now. So a hammer is a good hammer if it's capable of hammering nails. If it is not capable of doing so, that means that it is a bad hammer. If you're using the hammer for something other than what it is for, then it is not being a good hammer, but it might not necessarily be being a bad hammer, right? So if you take your hammer and you start like banging it on the desk to make noises, right? You want to make some loud, annoying noises, and so you just start bashing it against your desk over and over again. Right? Given that your desk is
Judges
probably
be like.
softer, yeah, right. That's a gavel technically, and there is a difference, right? So you can distinguish these things by their different common purposes, right? Okay, here, that's actually a great example, right? What
You're
is the difference
welcome.
between a hammer and a gavel, right? So a hammer, because it is for striking nails, what happens when you start banging it on the desk over and over again? So if you take a hammer and you start bashing your desk, what's going to happen?
You get damaged desk.
You sure do. If you take a gavel and you start bashing it on that little thing that stays on the desk that is for the gavel, that doesn't happen, right?
No, you get a
Because
loud noise that tells everybody to shut up.
exactly, right? Because the gavel, I think they're typically just all wood. I don't think they typically have like a metal head or a metal cap or anything. And so when it bashes against the thing that it's designed to bash against, the things aren't damaging each other. It's working, it's functioning properly.
As
And so it's a
intended.
different thing from a hammer. Exactly. Right. And so the hammer, if you're bashing it against the desk, it's not being a bad hammer. Not exactly. It's just being used for an alternative purpose. Now that alternative purpose is not good for the desk, say, in this case. But it's not necessarily bad for the hammer. The hammer is going to survive bashing against the desk over and over again just fine. Right? A hammer's head is harder than almost any desk-like material that you'll find. Mine is wood. If I were to bash my wooden desk with a hammer over and over again, it would damage the desk, not the hammer. Okay, fine, fair enough, great. But if I take that gavel and I start hammering nails with it, right, I am no longer now. I'm not just not using it for its intended purpose. I'm using it for a purpose that damages the thing, that means that it is acting contrary to what it's supposed to be doing. It's going to be less capable of doing what it's supposed to be doing in future and in present. So if I'm trying to hammer in nails with a gavel, which is like a wooden mallet, it's going to be damaging the head of the thing, and it's going to be less capable of doing gavel things properly. And so that's when we know that you are not just using it for a separate parallel purpose, but you're using it against its chief end. You're making it incapable of fulfilling its chief end either in the moment, like now, because you're using it improperly, or by damaging it for future purposes. You're making it in future less capable of doing what it's meant to do. All right, with me so far? Or did I lose you anywhere?
No, that's perfect. I was just letting you go
All right.
because uh, uh, you're better at explaining this because you're more familiar with again the philosophy. This is something that I have a more pragmatic understanding of. I was listening to I'll link this in the comments below. Uh, Professor Tim Shao on Capturing Christianity. He was discussing sexual ethics, abortion, uh, stuff like that. I don't think he and Cameron Bertuzzi got into guns, which I'm kind of disappointed by. I would really love to see that discussion. Unfortunately, my Facebook account where I was friends with Professor Shao is gone. I don't think he'll accept a friend request for my new one, sadly. So I don't know if I'll ever be able to
I
get him
mean,
on.
given the obviously alt name, I understand. But if you
Yeah,
get a wild friend request from good old John here, then I personally would recommend accepting. But that's up to you.
yeah. But yeah, I understand I understand what he was talking about from a pragmatic perspective.
Mhm.
Um, but from like a super deep like technical philosophical level, I really just it kind of clicked with me like, hey, these things have a function if they're not fulfilling their function or they're doing, if they're doing a different function that damages the thing, it's no longer like it's no longer fulfilling its function properly. How? So I guess. So I guess with our analogy,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. So now, one thing to note before you keep that thought in mind, I want to explain what is analogous about this,
mhm.
and because it's not quite precise, because what we're talking about in the realm of sexual ethics, very importantly, is not artifacts. It's not things that we make that we impart ends to. Right. So Aquinas makes this distinction, which this is actually one of those neat little places where I kind of disagree with Aquinas, but
Oh, those are rare.
oh, it's rare. It's rare, but it happens.
I'm not.
Um,
I don't consider myself a Thomist,
I don't
but
technically either, but if you ask a modernist what I am, I'm a Thomist.
that's fair. But Thomas Aquinas is
um,
one of those people that you disagree with at your own risk, and you
right,
better have a
right.
very good reason for doing so.
Well, okay, here's the problem. Aquinas doesn't think hammers exist,
Wait, what?
and I do. That's the difference. Okay, so here's why. A
I
hammer.
just threw me for a loop.
Okay, so a hammer is not a substance according to Aquinas. So in technical philosophical terms, a substance is a being. It is a thing, which is a union of form and matter, right? So it is a thing with a particular essence to it. So Aquinas, and this is following Aristotle. This is not something he came up with new. This is following Aristotle. Aquinas did not think that artifacts, things that we make, have essential forms.
Hmm.
They don't have intrinsic teleology. Teleology meaning they're directed towards ends, they have purposes. They have what's called extrinsic teleology. The difference being is that we the creators of things we call hammers, impart ends. We say, sort of nominally, we say that this sort of assembly of components has a particular end to it because we assign it those ends. And that's strictly different from natural objects, real beings that he thinks do exist. They have their own essential forms to them that are natural to them, that are innate, rather than being sort of imposed upon them by human creators, right? And so, because hammers are they only have these ends extrinsically, why I emphasize this is such an important why it's so important that this is an analogy is because it's really easy to fall into this nominalist trap of thinking that, well,
What's
you're just
nominalism
saying
for our
this
audience?
is
Sorry.
that ends or that traits or that essences are just are merely linguistic. It's what we call things rather than
Okay.
them being things themselves, right?
Okay.
So it's easy to fall into that trap here because you might say that, well, the end of, say, the human sexual faculty is just imposed upon it by God, and if you don't believe in God, then there's nothing imposing an end on it, and so it has no end, and so you can do whatever the hell you want with it, so to speak. Um, and the same would apply to any natural object, right? And Aquinas's point and why he makes this distinction so strongly, which I understand, why I disagree with this is because I think that we do in fact create objects, we create things, we create artifacts, and we do in fact give them intrinsic intrinsic ends, essences. We create things, right? Because we're in the image and likeness of God. That makes us sub creators, and this
Mm-hmm.
is following Duns Scotus more than Aquinas. It's a weird little distinction. It's also following Tolkien for that matter. Um,
Big fans of Tolkien on this podcast.
oh, excellent, good, me too. Um,
I probably need
but
to study his
it's
philosophy more. I'm really just read his
I have book
books.
recommendations. Let me know at some point. Um, there's a couple of great uh, Tolkien philosophy books. World, my cat was doing something very strange. Anyway,
It's okay. Cats interrupting podcasts is good for views, I'm told.
it is. It is. We're not visual a visual medium, so I can't just hold one up to the camera this time.
That's true.
Perhaps in future. Anyway, um, but so the difference between, say, the hammer and, say, I don't know, the steel in the head of the hammer is that the steel in the head of the hammer has certain intrinsic ends to it. It will act in certain ways because it is directed towards those ends. In other words, it is directed towards, say, um, that's a bad example. steel isn't directed towards a whole lot of things. Oh, okay. Steel
I
is
mean, I
directed
move
towards
steel at a lot of things.
certain like reactions with oxygen molecules, such as to oxidize, in other words, to rust under certain conditions, right? Or something like that.
Hmm.
Those are natural ends to the component parts of the hammer, the natural parts of it. The it's for hammering nails is something that we impose on it, and why this is important is that the natural ends of our biology are a lot more like the natural ends of physical objects than they are like the natural ends of artificial tools and things like that. Right?
Hmm.
And so the token example that a lot of Thomas will use for this is the say the phosphorus in the head of a match. Right? If you strike a match, you know that it will produce flame because the red and white phosphorus combined with the friction produced by the silicate is going to to trigger a chemical reaction. In other words, the two red and white phosphorus are oriented towards each other. They have a mutual end of producing an exothermic reaction, right? Of producing flame, in other words. And we exploit those natural ends to make it into an artifact, into an object that we use, right? And so there's a distinction to be made between the thing in itself, which has its own intrinsic ends, sort of God-given ends, if you want to go that way, um, versus the extrinsic ends that we impart onto things. Right? And this distinction can play out in problems in sexual ethics. Things like um, if we assume that our sexual faculties only have extrinsic ends because we use them in a certain way, well, it might turn out to be that we alter the way that we interact with each other in a social level, and so say with the pill or something like that. And so maybe because of that, our sexual ethics should change, which is nonsense because our nature has not changed and cannot change. Only how we interact with it changes, and there is a right way and wrong and a bunch of wrong ways and a bunch of other right ways. There's lots of rights and wrong ways of interacting with that nature.
Right. So I think where the somebody could object, and I think
Mm-hmm.
reasonably, to this is they hear the analogy to explain natural law, like the natural function of a hammer, right?
Mm-hmm.
What they would say is, well, it's obviously not super useful to bang a hammer on a desk and damage it, but is that a moral action? And if that isn't, because I don't think most people, I don't even think you and I as natural law ethicists would consider that a moral or immoral action.
Oh, I would.
Um, what's that?
I would, but I was recently convinced of this. So
Okay,
if you don't want to
interesting.
go down that road, then don't.
Good. Nice. It's
We
just.
needn't. But now this is in very brief.
Mm-hmm,
Any this is a point made by Ralph McInerney,
mm-hmm,
who's another Thomist. He points out that any action that we actually perform, in other words, anything that is done consciously, deliberately, and freely,
mm-hmm.
is in some sense morally significant, even if it's on a very minor level, if for no other reason than it shapes our character. Right? So
Interesting.
anything that we do has some moral dimension to it, as long as we're actually doing it and it's not just something that's
Mm-hmm.
happening, right? So sleepwalking doesn't count, and to use his wacky examples, being blown across the campus by a sudden wind also doesn't count. But even something as simple as an example I use for my class, right?
Mm-hmm.
Choosing which side of the building to walk along when I'm after class on my way back to my car, that's a morally significant decision, even if it's just am I choosing the comfort of the shade or the laziness of the more direct route, right? That's shaping the way that I will make more important decisions, more morally significant decisions in the future.
Okay, fair enough. That is actually a good answer because the whole objection I wanted to bring up, more to play devil's advocate, which I'm mostly going to
Mm-hmm.
be doing for this because Vince again
Yeah.
has a more solid grounding in this philosophy. Again, was like if something like banging a hammer on a desk just because it's fun isn't an inherently immoral thing, how could misusing our sexual faculties be an inherently immoral thing? But that is, I mean, that's certainly an answer.
How could banging on some random lady just for fun, so to
Yeah,
speak?
good heavens.
Um,
What would your so now I'm kind of
yeah,
curious.
good.
Before you were
What'd you say?
convinced of the position you currently hold, How would you have answered that previously?
Oh, that okay. So there's a couple of things you can still bring up to this, even if you aren't
Hmm.
convinced that every action is intrinsically moral. You can still bring up things like the formation of character,
Hmm.
right? Um, in the concrete, right? So if you're concerned about whether, say, um, sleeping around or porn use or masturbation or whatever, any of these various aberrant but allegedly fun things that we like to do, any of these things, we might say that they are still disordered because by acting in a way contrary, not necessarily contrary to, but even if we just stipulate that it is parallel rather than contrary, that it's not doing any direct harm. If we stipulate that, we take that argument on its face, which I would disagree with, but we'll come back to it. If we take that to be the case, it still is happening that our um, our habits of thinking and our habits of acting are being formed in a certain way, right? So if we and this comes down to the whole the issue that um, porn addicts tend to, or very often will have things like erectile dysfunction and stuff like that, and it's entirely psychological, so to speak, due to a kind of forming or warping of the way that we think of sexual matters, right? Um, and it can casual sex and repeated hookups and that sort of thing can degrade our ability to form long-lasting stable commitments, again partially for biochemical reasons, but also just partially for psychological reasons, for because you're developing vice rather than virtue. So that's one thing, right? That's one argument that I would have contrary to that.
Okay.
There's others. You can also point out that um, it is not it's not merely to act in a way that is sort of a parallel use of our sexual faculties. It is, in fact, acting contrary to the intrinsic ends of our natural faculties, because our sexual faculty has as its primary end family, and by that I mean it is the formation of a family. This is, by the way, why incest is wrong, because the use of the sexual faculty is in part in order to form a family. And if you are using your sexual faculty within a context where a familial relationship is already present, you are doubling up on, or you are overwriting, or you're acting contrary to the existing relationship by trying to impose a new one upon it, right? And so this is the sort of classical reasons why incest is unethical, because it's not just um, acting in a way which will likely lead to unviable or less than ideal offspring or something like that, because lots of people marry people who are not going to have perfect offspring together, right? Like that, and I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. That's not what's wrong with it. What's wrong with it is this kind of acting contrary to the end of one, family, and two, sexuality. And you would say the same thing about serial monogamy or casual hookups or pornography and masturbation or whatever. You're in each case you're acting in this individual case in a way that is contrary to the ultimate ends of sex by by dismissing or undermining its use as a call it a bonding agent, right? As a way of bringing people together into a family and then forming that family by procreating, right? By reproducing. Okay, so that's another argument. There's one more, and this is a good one. This is probably the argument I would lean on the most,
Hmm.
and I get this largely from Bishop Robert Barron. So take by analogy, if you're playing a sport, pick your favorite. Um, I mean, you can go with golf.
Hmm.
It's a very clear example. I think it's the one he tends to use. He either uses golf or baseball, and he oscillates between them. But we can go with golf. Right? So suppose you want to
Safe
play
ones. A
golf.
lot of people play both those sports.
Yeah, it's true. It's right. Yeah. Suppose you want to play golf. Right. Okay. And suppose you go up to the tee and you take out your putter and you take it in. You take a few steps back, and then you take a running start at the tee, and you give it a good, nice one-handed swing. That's a bad idea, right?
Right.
Right. And it's because now you might say something like this. You might say something like, "Well, I'm just having fun, right? I want to play the game, so let me play the game. Let me play it how I want to play it. I want to play it like this, and so this is how I'm going to play." This is, of course, how like small children think of gameplay, not how serious golfers think of gameplay. If you're serious about the thing that you're doing, even if you're doing it for fun, even if it is just a recreational activity, you're gonna want to do it well. You're not just gonna want to bullshit. In other words, you're gonna want to put in the effort and to carefully think and carefully consider how it is that you're acting. You want to, in the golf context, you want to perfect your swing. You want to get better at driving the ball. You want to get better at knowing which club to use. You want to get better form. You want to get you want to be able to get the ball onto the green rather than just going swinging wildly and having a good time. Because not only will you become better at the game, but by becoming better at the game, you will be having a better time playing it than just kind of putting around and not really trying at it. Now you can apply the same thing all the more so to human action, innately human action, action that has to do with the human essence, things that are essential to us. And sex and sexuality is one of those things that is very essential to the human person and to the human nature.
It's kind of how we get more people. And getting
Yeah,
more
right.
people turns out to be a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, it does. Contrary to some popular belief, but those people are absurd, hilariously absurd. But
Antinatalists are wild, dude. But that's a.
Thanos was not just evil; he was also retarded. Can I say that on YouTube? You can
I
bleep
don't.
that if you need to.
The problem is I don't know how to edit. I'm doomed. I'll. And this goes
You'll
out
figure it
tomorrow.
out.
It's
You'll
too
figure it
late.
out.
It's too late.
Or
I don't know.
it's
I
more than
just
30 minutes
listened
in,
to.
so I'm sure.
I think yeah.
Um,
I did listen to Tower Gang say a bunch of slurs, and that video
yeah,
is
no,
still
yeah,
up. So
yeah. Anyway, whatever. Point is that because human sexuality is so important, it's so essential to being human. It's so essential to human nature, the human species, all that. You want to get it right.
right.
And I'm not even just saying that, you ought to want to get it right, or that you probably want to get it right, or it's an important thing to get right. No, I'm saying that you, in fact, want to get it right because I know you do. And stop lying to me if you're saying that you don't. If you say that, I don't care about doing sex well, I just insert colorful metaphor. I'm not going to put effort into this one. Um, um, No, I don't believe you. I actually do think that you care because you are a human being. And part of being a human being is wanting to be good at being a human being. And part of being good at being a human being is doing distinctively human things distinctively well. And part of that is doing it in the right way, with the right ends, in the right context, and in this case, with the right person. Right. And so doing it wrong is fundamentally inhuman. And so you don't want to do that because you are, in fact, a human. Just like if you are playing golf, you actually do, just by the fact that you're playing golf, you do actually want to get better at golf. Otherwise, you wouldn't be playing golf.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's I think that last one's like the most powerful
Mhm.
answer to the objection I brought up earlier, outside of just saying no, every single action is moral in some capacity.
They
Um,
fit together to some
yeah,
extent, right?
yeah,
Because everything has to do with our being human insofar as it's a human action, and so you want to be good at being a human, and that involves,
mm-hmm.
all kinds of things like not destroying your stuff when you have stuff that you don't want to destroy, like your desk.
Yeah,
It's minor, but it's minor. It's not. And this is actually important to note too, that it is a minor thing. It's not nearly as significant, right? Getting hammer fun activities or whatever, getting that right is not nearly as intrinsic to human nature as getting sexuality right.
yeah,
That's way more central. It's way more important. And if you get it wrong, way more stuff can go wrong.
yeah. Like we are saying, this is one of the most important things because uh, sex is how we make babies, and making new babies is. I actually think it's the. I think it's
It's
like the
more than that.
second commandment
It's
God actually issues. Like at least that's written down. I could be
um
mistaken. It's either the second or
to
third.
man, yes.
Yeah, to man, yeah.
Yes.
Because the first one's don't eat the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of knowledge. And good, that's hard to say.
The
Don't
tree,
eat.
the tree in the garden. Yeah, don't
Yeah,
eat that tree.
yeah. Don't eat that tree. You can eat the fruit, just don't eat the tree. No, don't eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then the next one is be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah, right. And so yes, it is absolutely it's essential to human nature. And now also, I would go further than that. It's not just about making babies; it's about making families.
Right.
Because we, as a species, we are specifically we are very we're very dependent in our young age on family, and
Hmm.
we're even very dependent throughout our lives on community. Right? We're not just rational animals; we're political animals, and that means social. Right? We're societal creatures, and the fundamental unit of that society is the family, which is formed through sex and sexuality,
Yeah.
right? Through marital union. And it's not an accident that that's where babies come from,
Right.
right? That all fits together,
Yeah. Another
so to speak.
objection I've heard, and this is actually comes from a friend who uh, held to natural law, but has since decided that he doesn't believe it. And he says that
Oh, what a shame.
gets, yeah, it gets trapped in, um, it gets trapped in, oh, what's the word? Empiricism,
Hmm.
which I
Okay,
I didn't find that
I
objection satisfactory
I understand where it's coming
myself.
from. So let
Yeah,
me let me
same. No, I
steelman
agree with
this.
you as well.
Let me steelman this. So that the idea is that it depends far too much on mutable, contingent, observable facts about the human person, and so that it isn't in any way eternal or transcendent or anything like that. And because of that, it's not as significant as we're making it out to be. So that's part of it. Or maybe it's also that that we could be in some way mistaken about the our observations about our faculties and things like that. Or maybe it's something like that like I kind of mentioned really early on that our that those observable facts, those observable contingent facts about our natures and our faculties could change depending on technology or social circumstance or whatever. And in any of those cases, I think that is to some degree correct. There's something true about that. In other words, if we were not human beings, if we were a fundamentally different kind of creature, the natural law would apply to us in a very different way. It wouldn't apply in the same way. We could, in principle, think of creatures that reproduce sexually, but not monogamously. Right? I mean, there are speculative fiction examples of this abound, but I mean, the clearest example would be something like if we reproduced like I don't know salmon, if we spawned like fish, basically, right? In which case, because there would be no need for a familial formation per se, and because it would be that our sort of reproductive and capacities and that whole thing would be largely communal, there wouldn't be an institution of marriage natural to our species. And so it is in some way, right? All of the precepts of the natural law are largely contingent upon human nature being what it is. And if human nature were fundamentally different, yeah, our ethics would be pretty fundamentally different. Take for example, I like to torture my students with this one, so bear with me, or play along if you'd like. Um, is murder wrong?
Of course.
Okay, yeah, right, absolutely. Not going to disagree with you there. Okay, can you think of something that could be different about our nature that would make murder not wrong?
Ooh.
Because I can.
Oh, go on, go on.
I mean, if you want to try, I will open the
Oh,
floor to you. And
no,
I
I'd
love
have to
this.
ponder
No?
too long.
Okay, fair enough. We want to keep this going. So, all right. Suppose that. Okay, actually, let me throw this one at you. There is a context, a human context, wherein something very closely analogous to murder is perfectly morally acceptable.
And it's not self-defense.
Nope, that's not
Okay.
murder.
Fair.
Unjustified homicide,
Okay.
the direct intentional killing of an innocent human being.
Okay. Here, I
You've
haven't
done
heard
it.
this before.
I guarantee you've done it.
Oh,
Probably this week.
well, did I breathe wrong?
No. I gotta check your Discord channel and see if you played Halo with the boys this week.
Oh, that's true.
Because
I've not.
because
I was playing. I have played video games.
there we go. Online with other human beings.
Okay, now I think we might be
Have you
playing a
have you killed any of them?
semantic. Yeah, a lot because I play Halo.
Yeah,
Even just when
right.
it's by myself.
And was there anything wrong with it?
Nah.
No, no. Why not?
Oh, because we respawn.
Yeah, absolutely. So if human beings, when you kill them, just respawned at their last save location or their bed or whatever, then killing them would not be or murdering them. Murder. I mean, I actually really be strong about this. Murder would not be wrong per se. Now, it might still be wrong in some contexts,
Well, it's
right?
like
If you're
homeboy's got like $1 million in his save file, and you walk up and just
yeah,
he's got
right,
to earn that
you're
million
killing him for
dollars
his loot.
back.
Right, you're killing him for his loot. Right. Okay, then it's stealing, and stealing is still wrong. Right? Okay, that's still wrong, but the murder aspect of it under those weird circumstances, if we were fundamentally different kinds of creatures, the murder part wouldn't be wrong. It would be the stealing that is, and that still is under those kinds of circumstances. Or maybe maybe you're griefing. Maybe you're just spawn camping someone,
Oh, that's always rough.
right? In like real life spawn camping someone. You can imagine how wildly irritating that would be, right? But it wouldn't be
Just
because you're murdering them, it'd be because you're harassing them, right?
oh
So
gosh.
so we can see that even something as fundamental as the moral precept against murder is completely contingent upon us being certain kinds of creatures, on
Right.
us being mortal creatures with one life to live, right? This even includes the afterlife, by the way, right? So we don't reincarnate or respawn or whatever.
Right. Right.
Um, but if we did, murder would not be the crime that it is. It wouldn't be wrong, at least not in all contexts, or at least not universally, like it actually is in our real life, dictated by our real human nature. And so this is in large part a response to this criticism of natural law as being empirical. It's, I mean, Chad, yes, because it is, right? It absolutely is empirical in the sense that it is based off of um, our the nature of human beings and human actions. And so, yeah, if we did not reproduce sexually and our little downstairs area was just something fun that we got to play with once in a while, and sometimes doing it with a partner is extra fun, okay, fine. There's nothing there would under those circumstances be nothing wrong with what we might call fornication because because under those circumstances it would be completely disconnected from the formation of family, right? But that isn't the case, and it can't be the case. And it's not just that, well, maybe we can alter and change that scientifically, which, yeah, we can in fact sterilize ourselves such that our downstairs fun zone is just a fun zone and is not actually for any kind of purpose of reproduction or the formation of
I
family
would
or anything.
say that this kind of going back to my buddy's objection of just
Mm-hmm.
it gets trapped in empiricism. My initial thought was the principle doesn't, the details do, or the details depend on science. The principle behind it doesn't, because saying X, Y, and Z is dependent on like its nature, right, or moral actions dependent
Mm-hmm.
on its nature. I'm not as familiar with technical language. I'm probably
No, that's
butchering
absolutely
it.
right. You got it.
Okay,
You
good.
got it.
Yeah, just because X, Y, Z, right? Um, oh, I've lost my thought now. Where was I? Oh yeah,
that
yeah.
it's that
It's
it's the details of the moral behavior
right, right,
that
right.
are
Yeah,
dependent on the empirical data. So yeah, go ahead.
yeah. But uh, the principle of moral actions being, or like saying that the thing's function in part dictates whether an action's moral. Like that's a principle that can be true regardless of uh, that can be true regardless
Yeah.
of like the observable reality.
Right, and regardless of what the function of the thing is,
Yeah.
right?
Thank you.
There are different moral rules that apply to your reproductive organs that apply to your digestive organs, right? There gluttony is a sin and lust is a sin, but they're different sins. They're different things that can go wrong with different parts of ourselves because those different parts of ourselves have different functions, they operate in different ways. And so you can do different kinds of wrong things with them, right? So yeah, it is largely contingent, but like you said, right, the principle of the ethics or the morality of something is in large part dependent upon its intrinsic function.
Yeah.
That that doesn't change. Right? That is what it is.
Yeah. So that was kind of my initial thought, and like that was the first thing that came to mind when he was like, I don't really believe in natural anymore because it like it gets trapped by some sort of empiricism. It kind of reminded me of oh, what's his name? He's like that really cringy. He was one of the Four Horsemen. He just has completely gone insane since
Hitchens?
Trump took office.
Oh,
Harris.
Sam Harris.
Yeah,
Sam
yeah, yeah.
Harris. Yeah.
He
Yeah.
because he won't say he's an empiricist, but because he's a diehard naturalist,
Well, yeah.
he's an empiricist. Whether he wants to admit it or not, but he'll try to make like moral statements with which you can't really do with empiricism. Like you need to be able to say that like using a thing outside of its function is wrong. You can't deduce that empirically.
No, no, that relies upon. I mean, it depends on what you mean by empiricism.
That's true.
But if you
That's
mean
true too.
if by empiricism you mean sort of like post-enlightenment scientific rational empiricism, that kind of thing, then yeah, absolutely not. But if by empirical analysis you mean what Aristotle meant, which is a posteriori analysis of the world, then yeah, then
Our poor
sure.
audience doesn't know what op story means. That one I'm
I
even a little
mean, it
lost on.
means empirical, so
Oh,
there.
okay, there.
Um, okay, so it means the knowledge that we arrive at by observing the world and observing things in
Hmm.
reality, rather than that we derive purely from logic,
Yeah.
right, from reason alone. And so it maps on with this rational empirical distinction, more or less. The difference, of course, being that for Aristotle and for all of the ancients and all of the medievals and basically every classical philosopher before the Enlightenment, empirical analysis included things like ends. It included things like forms. It included things like essences. It included things like natures. It included all of this stuff that it included things like souls, right? It included stuff that modern empiricists would think is either made up or at least spooky.
Oh, the Enlightenment is so fake and so gay, and I'm so tired of its consequences.
Yeah, yeah, no, I can't disagree with that at all. Not at all.
Oh.
I mean, it comes down to this, right? So I can't tell you how many times that I and every other, broadly speaking, classical philosopher I know. And this is almost universal experience. That every philosopher who primarily studies the pre-modern world, whether that's ancient or medieval or both, we have all had at least one experience where we talk with either one or a bunch of modern philosophers who strictly study the modern world and are, really, really well read on the contemporary philosophical discussion. And we say something that is absolutely normal and unbelievably commonsensical, that makes perfect sense, that every human being who's ever lived before the 16th century knew to be obviously true.
Yeah,
And
like
it
sex is for
blows their
making babies
freaking
and
mind.
families.
Yeah, that blows the freaking mind, or at least it can, of like really sophisticated modern philosophers. I, my experience of this, it didn't have to do with sexual ethics. So I'll very briefly, I'll try and summarize. I was explaining
He'll
more or
very
less.
briefly, so an hour later.
I'm gonna stick to I'm gonna give myself like 2 minutes for this. Um, I was explaining to a friend of mine who studies primarily like early modern thought, so like 16th through 18th century, give or take, as well as contemporary issues as well. So modern, very much a modernist, a modern philosopher, very smart guy. Um, another grad student who is now a professor as well. He knows his stuff, brilliant. But when I gave a very brief, very commonsensical explanation of the form matter distinction that you will find in Plato, in Aristotle, in all the medievals, in most of the ancients, it's like I had opened up the secrets of the cosmos before him. Like the look on his face was just utterly astounded and mystified by what I thought was the simplest and most obvious thing in the world, because I had studied what people used to think more than 500 years ago. And I mean, McInerney, who I mentioned, the introduction to his book Ethica Thomistica, it says that basically the same thing. He once gave a talk to a bunch of philosophers about the very basics of Thomistic ethics, and they were all blown away by how incredible and novel his ideas were. And he was distraught because nothing he said was meant to be new in any way. It was just what everyone has always thought forever, and it should be painfully obvious. But the Enlightenment, its consequences, right?
Seriously, we're gonna have to do another episode, like just you and I, just ripping the Enlightenment to shreds. I'm probably more on
Or
the
I mean,
ancient, less on the medieval side. I think that has
it's
something to do with my profound infatuation with the great patriarch Abraham.
yeah. I mean, there is a continuity between them, though.
Yeah,
So there's a continuity between them that there isn't post Enlightenment.
yeah. It's almost like the Enlightenment was a satanic trick by a bunch of gay French people,
I
and there's
mean,
still
it's not just the French. The Germans did it too.
That's true, but
There
it
were
like
even some Italians who got in on it, which there were
God,
definitely some Englishmen. There was, of
yeah,
course, also the Scotsman. The Scotsman.
the Scotsman
The
singular.
Scot. If you okay, listen. If you say the Scottish philosopher, any modernist will know who you're talking about and say, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah." Any medievalist will know who you're talking about and just glare because you're
Yeah,
talking about David Hume.
David Hume and his consequences have been a disaster for the human race.
I always like to say that my entire object in my professional philosophical career is to exhume as much of philosophy as I can.
Good. Are you exhuming philosophy from ex Hume?
Yeah, yeah, that was the pun.
Good.
Yeah, yeah, that was the intended pun. You got it. You got
Good. Good. I'm only a
it.
little
Oh
bit. I'm
boy.
only a little bit retarded. Not a lot of bit retarded.
Yeah, same. We all are a little bit. It depends on how what you do with it. You know.
It's true. So
Yeah.
that's a very basic and brief run. Well, it's as brief as you can get. Uh, Rundown of the natural law sexual ethic, and I'm gonna sign off by saying for those, since our audience is mostly like personal friends and family, they're mostly Christians. Um, you we haven't gone over like we've gone like over the philosophical foundation of sexual ethics. Uh, I'm just gonna have you keep having you on, Vince, for this one.
Make it a series.
Yeah. We'll make it a series. I probably won't upload it.
We'll talk about something more. Well, we'll talk about something more high level controversial rather than really basic
Yeah.
controversial another
Yeah.
time.
Exactly. Um. uh. You probably know the Christian sexual ethic, the standard like one that most people know about, and I wanted to kind of close off by saying, don't beat yourself up too much if you don't live up to it, because we're not going to do that this side of eternity. Just
No.
remember that we are saved by grace uh, through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, and rest in that. Also, go to private confession. If you're Catholic, it's a sacrament. If you're not Catholic, it's just good
It
spiritual
should be.
discipline. Yeah, no, unless you mean evangelical Catholic.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I don't
Evangelical
know. I mean,
Catholic is what we
we
called
could debate
ourselves
about
originally.
whether Lutherans should consider confession to be a sacrament or not, or whether that's in line with Luther or not.
Yeah, I'd have to read the. So this is my
I'm not as
confession.
familiar with Luther.
Yeah,
Again, he's outside my time period. I
yeah,
forget what happened between 1277 and 1977.
yeah. That's fair. Uh no, he retained private confession. It's not treated like we only have two sacraments. It's the baptism
Right, right.
and Holy Communion.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we still practice confession. We do corporate confession at the beginning of our mass, and yes, some of us still call it the mass because if you read the Augsburg Confession, we retain the mass.
Yeah,
Um,
like Luther didn't dispute that.
yeah, I know, but some people don't understand that, especially like all the Calvinists are like, oh my gosh, Martin Luther's so great. And I'm like, you just don't know. But yeah, my point.
Even Calvin would be
Oh gosh.
appalled at a lot of modern Calvinists
Well, modern Calvinism's
because
like,
they're all Zwingliists. Why?
yeah,
That's
that's
the problem.
true. It's just
Anyway,
this, it's
we're
just
getting
this,
wildly off topic.
I know it's
You
because you and I
promised
are,
to keep this under an hour, didn't you?
yeah, we're about there. But yeah, just
All
remember,
right.
that Jesus loves you and he's not going to stop loving you. Just, just repent, confess your sins to your brothers. It's biblical. It's in there. Uh, and just practice good Christian virtue. Anyway, thank you guys so much. I forgot to say at the beginning, but please do like, subscribe, leave a comment. These are all important things for both the YouTube and Rumble algorithms. And I promise someday I will figure out how to get these onto a proper podcasting platform where they'll probably do better than they do on the video streaming platforms. Thank you guys, and goodbye.